to round one of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. That's right, we brought it back bigger and better than before. And it is a wonderful time to be with you today. Now, of course, this competition would not have been possible without some very important people and sponsors. And I want to take the opportunity to just give them a big up. Of course, we're talking about the University of the West Indies, the Center for Reparation Research, the UE Press, the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, the University of Hull, and of course our main partner, the Repair Campaign. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and for the purposes of this match, I will be your chair judge. Now, joining me on my panel are two other adjudicators who I'll ask to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Javan Downey.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. The name is Javon Downey, and I am serving as one of your wing adjudicators in this match. I am expecting a very exciting and riveting match, and good luck to both teams.
Thank you very much, Javan Downey, and of course, Mr. Kojay Henry.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Kojay Henry. I am also looking forward to a very productive and engaging match today. And I'll also be serving as one as the wing adjudicators in this match today. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So there you go, teams. You have your panel. Now, who are our teams who will be debating today? We have a match between Jamaica and Guyana. From Jamaica, in proposition, we have the team Merl High School and the opponents from Guyana, Queen's College. At this point in time, we want to hear from the debaters. So we invite the debaters from Merl High School to introduce themselves.
Good morning, my name is Astarte Montague.
Good morning, my name is Ashanti Radwi.
And good morning, my name is Sanjay Donaldson. And today we will be representing Merl Grove High School.
Wonderful. And of course, the team from Queen's College, Guyana.
A pleasant good morning, everyone. Today I'm your first speaker, Africo Blackman, and
I am the second speaker, Mehisa Guru.
And I'm the third speaker, David Sugar.
Today we'll be representing Queen's College.
Wonderful. Our debaters are loud and proud. The motion in front of us today. This House believes that without reparation, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment with high-income countries. What a motion in front of us. This debate is going to be governed by some rules, and of course the debaters already know the rules, but as a refresher course and for the benefit of the viewing audience, I'll go through them nonetheless. So the first speakers from each side, you will speak for 7 minutes. Second speakers, you have 6 minutes. And the third and final speakers from each team, you will have 5 minutes. The first and last minute of each speech is what we call protected time, which means that no points of information will be allowed during those periods of protected time. Outside of protected time, points of information are not only allowed, but they're absolutely encouraged. Of course, in between the first and second speakers and the second and third speakers, we have something interesting, a real treat for you, the viewing audience. We call it the cross-examination period. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the cross-examination period when we get there. You've heard enough from me. You want to hear from your debaters. And so, with no further delay, we invite the first speaker from the team in proposition, Merl High School, to open the debate, Astarte Montague.
Hello, are we being seen?
Loud and clear, Merl, the floor is yours.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. We disconnected for a while, so I wasn't sure what happened. Am I supposed to start my speech right now?
Yes, you are up.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Wealth is not created in a vacuum. It is often inherited, sometimes violently. Good day, esteemed panel of adjudicators. Teammates, fellow debaters, my worthy opponents, and audience members, I'm Astarte Montague, the Prime Minister for today's match under the motion. This House believes that without reparations, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment with high-income countries. And as the Prime Minister, I'll lay the foundation for this debate while exploring my two substantives that cement our argument: how colonial extraction destroyed Caribbean wealth and capital, and how even after the transition from post-colonialism to independence, colonizers thwarted economic sufficiency. My second speaker will further broaden the horizons by educating you on the neo-colonial aspect of this fight for reparations. Additionally, the underdevelopment in infrastructure and the privatization in industries. Finally, our reply speaker will bring everything together and seal our argument by summarizing and providing how we have won this debate. Firstly, let's discuss the key terms in the motion: reparations, economically in alignment, and high-income countries. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines reparations as making amends, offering expiation, or giving satisfaction for a wrong or injury. In this debate, we see reparations as economical in amendments, such as subsidizing into the education sector, the agricultural sector, or financial amendments. Economically in alignment in terms of costs, benefits, efficiency, growth, employment, and government revenue, and financial sustainability. Additionally, high meaning nations classified as economically developed with high levels of national income per person, strong infrastructure, advanced industries, and a high standard of living, such as France, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, let's touch on how colonial extraction destroyed Caribbean capital and wealth by designing the region as an extractive economy whose primary function was to transfer wealth to Europe rather than to generate local development. Agricultural commodities such as sugar, coffee, cocoa, and later bauxite were produced using enslaved or severely underpaid labor and exported to metropolitan countries, where profits were accumulated, reinvested, and used to fuel industrialization. Because the economic surplus generated in the Caribbean was consistently repatriated, there was little opportunity for domestic reinvestment in infrastructure, education, or industry. Capital accumulation, which depends on the retention and reinvestment of surplus, was therefore systematically blocked, leaving Caribbean societies economically strained even after centuries of production. According to reparations published September 2025, the Runnymede Trust, which is the UK's leading independent racial justice think tank, says that half of the global population live in poverty and own just 2% of global wealth between them, while the richest 10% own 76% of wealth. Global wealth disparities are connected to histories of colonialism, the extraction of resources, land, and people, and the legacies of these processes that see vast sums of wealth flow from the Caribbean to Europe. After decolonization, many newly independent countries were left not only with weak export-based economies, but with little choice other than to borrow from their former colonial powers. What is clear is the intentional economic ruin that formerly colonized countries were left to contend with. Those subject to colonial rule were forced to compensate their oppressors. Haiti was subject to a payment back to France in return for recognition of its independence to compensate its former colonial power. With all that the Caribbean faced and its economy being used as a primary means of extraction instead of development, it's ludicrous of my opponents to believe that the Caribbean can align economically with high-income countries, one of which that stole our wealth and used us as a cash cow. Without reparations, the Caribbean is being asked to compete in a race where one side started centuries ahead using stolen wealth. My opponents may bring up different countries that went through colonization and got back on their feet to having a stable economy in alignment with high-income countries. The US was colonized, but not the type of colonization the Caribbean went through. The US was a settler colony. Europeans migrated permanently, took land, established farms, towns, and industries, and kept wealth inside the colony. And over time, wealth accumulated locally. The Caribbean was an extractive plantation colony. Europeans did not settle in large numbers. They owned plantations remotely and sent profits back to Europe. The economy existed to extract wealth, not to build society. My second speaker will expound. Mr. Speaker, even after independence, colonial powers made it extremely difficult for Caribbean states to recover economically by leaving behind legal and economic systems designed for dependence rather than development. Newly independent countries inherited weak export-based economies, unequal land ownership, and limited access to capital, forcing them to rely heavily on former colonizers and international financial institutions for loans and trades. Through unfair trade arrangements and later IMF and World Bank structural adjustment programs, Caribbean governments were pressured to cut public spending, open their markets to foreign competition, and prioritize debt repayment over social and economic development. As a result, political independence did not translate into economic freedom. and the Caribbean remained locked in a system of dependency that continues to limit its ability to align economically with high-income countries without reparations. Justice requires that we reckon with our past, repair the damages done, and commit to a fairer future. The proposition stands firm in the fight for reparations and momentarily rests.
Thank you very much. That was the first speaker from Merl High School, Astarte Montague. To open this debate for Queen's College, we invite their first speaker, Africo Blackman.
Pleasant good morning, everyone. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, distinguished judges, honorable members of the proposition, and an audience that did not come here for fairy tales, though some may be tempted to tell one. Today, this House confronts a question of profound consequence: the belief that without reparations, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment with high-income countries. The opposition takes a clear, grounded position. We do not deny the justice of reparations, but the advancement of the Caribbean is not dependent on reparations. Yes, colonialism extracted wealth, distorted institutions, and left structural scars across the Caribbean. That history matters. But that history explains our past, where we started, and not whether progress is still possible. And anchoring this entire debate is one simple truth: money without reform is motion without progress. Now picture this. Tomorrow morning, a Caribbean Prime Minister steps in front of a podium. Historic moment, cameras flashing. A single headline dominates the entire news. Reparation.
Point of information.
Denied. Applause erupts, flag waves, the check clears, then Tuesday comes. A small business owner still waits 18 months for approval. Ports still move slower than global trade, and productivity, according to the Caribbean Development Bank, in its 2024 to 2025 assessments, still remains flat. The money arrived, but the system did not change. That is not development. That is hope spent faster than it was earned. That is where the proposition's economics collapse. Economic convergence has never been driven by compensation alone. It has been driven by
Point of information.
Denied. Productive institutions and deliberate reform. Let me prove that with 3 economic realities. The Caribbean's problem is not capital, it is productivity. According to the Caribbean Development Bank, in its 2024 policy outlook, and reinforced by the International Monetary Fund in June 2025, Caribbean productivity growth has fallen to near zero. Not a lack of funding, but a lack of output per worker. The IMF's June 2025 address to Caribbean policymaker identifies high business costs.
Point of information.
Regimes. Denied. Inefficient tax structures, fragmented infrastructure planning. These are not colonial footnotes. These are present-day policy failures. So, honorable members of the proposition, how does a reparations check eliminate a licensing backlog? How does it retain a labor force overnight? How does it suddenly make Caribbean firms globally competitive? It doesn't. Well, as students of economics know, appearances often move faster than evidence, which is why claims seem persuasive. Proposition, until we examine them closely. You cannot inject money into an unproductive system and expect productivity to magically appear. That is not economics. That is optimism dressed up as policy. Secondly, policy, not reparations, is how poor countries became rich. Take, for example, Singapore. In 1965...
Point of information.
Denied. In 1965, after being separated from Malaysia, Singapore had no natural resources, slums housing nearly 70% of its population, and no reparations. What it did have was policy discipline. Singapore pursued export-oriented industrialization, aggressively attracting foreign direct investment. It established the Economic Development Board to coordinate long-term investment strategies. It aligned education, skills, and productivity growth. And guess what? Subsequently, productivity surged. No reparations, just reform. Now, let's take a close look at Vietnam. Once among the poorest countries in the world.
Point of information.
Denied. According to World Bank and Oxford Economics Analysis, published between 2023 and 2024, Vietnam's integration into the global supply chain transformed it into a manufacturing powerhouse. Vietnam followed the same path: liberalization, integration, productivity growth, and yet again, no reparations check. Yet yes, I know what the proposition is thinking. These countries differ in size and history from the Caribbean. However, it must be noted that high-income countries never developed by waiting around for compensation. Let's take a look at South Korea now. In the 1950s, South Korea was poorer than many Caribbean states. Colonized, war-torn, its cities reduced to rubble. Its GDP per capita lower than Jamaica's, lower than Barbados, lower than Trinidad's at the time. And yet, no reparations secured its future. What secured it was choice. South Korea chose discipline over dependence. It built an industrial state, not overnight wealth. It invested relentlessly in education, turning human capital into its primary resource. It coordinated government, banks, and industry to push reports, reward productivity, and punish inefficiency. Institutions came first. Growth followed. Today, South Korea is a high-income economy, home to global firms, advanced manufacturing, and technological leadership. So let me ask the proposition, respectfully, of course. If advancement requires reparations first, how did South Korea pass us while waiting for none? Money without reform is motion without progress. Reparations without reform reproduce colonial outcomes. Here is the paradox that the proposition failed to acknowledge or avoid. If reparations arrive without reform, it risks reinforcing that dependency. The International Monetary Fund in its June 2025 Caribbean policy is brief. Sustained growth depends on competitiveness, resilience, and institutional efficiency. Reparations without reform is like giving medicine without actually curing the illness. Let me be clear, the opposition does not reject reparations, but rather the illusion that reparations is a prerequisite for success. And that is why our second speaker here will expound on governance, and our third speaker will elaborate on economic dependency. So I leave with this house one final question. So if money alone built nations, why have countries like Singapore surged ahead while the Caribbean, despite aids and remittances, remain behind? Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was the first speaker from Queen's College. The debate is reaching a fever pitch. Let's heat it up some more with the cross-examination period. So, this segment works as follows. The team in opposition Queen's College will pose 3 questions to the team in proposition, Merl Grove High School. Each question can last no more than 10 seconds, and each answer can last no more than 45 seconds. Of note, only one individual from the team asking the question may do so at any given point. However, for the team answering the question, all 3 debaters can chime in to provide a robust answer as long as it sticks within that 45-second period. Now, within this very same period of cross-examination, after Queens have posed their questions to Merl Grove and Merl Grove has answered those questions, we'll invite Merl Grove to pose their 3 questions to Queens. All right? So, of course, just for the benefit of the viewing audience, it goes question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, and then we flip it. Merl Grove asks a question and Queens answers, and the cross-examination continues until we have reached its conclusion. Now, with that out of the way, we invite the first question from Team Queen's College, Guyana.
To the proposition, if colonial extraction alone determines present underdevelopment, how do you explain countries like Singapore and South Korea that were also exploited, yet currently hold high income status? Countries like Singapore and South Korea, for example, South Korea, where they received post-war investments, while the Caribbean did not receive any reparations at all.
As well as countries such as Singapore and South Korea, they were settler colonies compared to the Caribbean, which was extraction colonies. So we were used to extract raw materials, and compared to colonies such as Singapore and South Korea, they were settler colonies. So they had industries already built in them by former colonizers. So they were not only able to use their raw materials, but they were also able to use the same raw materials and
Another question, please.
Yes, my second question to the proposition. Haiti received debt relief, foreign aid, and billions in international assistance for decades, yet remains poor, and doesn't that show that money transfers alone, like reparations, do not automatically create development?
to that I answer. Haiti was forced by France to pay an independence debt at the time of 150 million francs. In today's money, that converts to 560 million USD, according to the New York Times.
Question?
Thank you. And my third question. Most Caribbean states have been politically independent for over 50 years. So what specific evidence proves that reparations, rather than domestic reforms, diversification, and governance are the missing factors preventing growth?
Political independence doesn't negate or mean that a country is financially or economically independent. The reason why it's not the finance or the government that is causing the reason that the country cannot economically align is because when they got the country and when the country became independent, there was nothing to start with, because literally everything, the Caribbean was used as an extractive colony. So everything was already extracted and they literally had to pay back their debts as well.
Next question, please.
All right, and that ends the first period, rather the first half of this first period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we invite the team Merl Grove High School to pose their 3 questions to Team Queen's College.
What mechanism does the opposition believe allow capital poor states to rapidly develop without external compensation or debt?
Could you repeat the question, please?
What mechanisms does the opposition believe allow capital poor states to rapidly develop without external compensation or debt?
Well, we would be following the model that Singapore said, even though you said that they did not start from scratch. They started from 2/3 of their population living in slums. So their policy was mainly in regards to good governance and anti-corruption, which is what we hope to implement in our argument.
Does the opposition believe that we should just let these people off the hook for committing crimes against our economies for centuries, actually?
Definitely not. As I would have stated and continuously reiterated in my argument, I said that we do not deny the justice of reparations, but the moot states, it's stating that we're depending on our economic advancement to come from reparations. We do not need reparations to advance economically in alignment with our income countries if we do not fix those internal matters.
Okay. How should Caribbean governments fund infrastructure, education, and industrialization starting from little capital bases?
Can you kindly repeat the question?
How should Caribbean governments fund infrastructure, education, and industrialization starting from limited capital bases?
And can you provide examples in the Caribbean that have attained wealth such as Singapore and North Korea?
So, yeah, right.
That sounds like 2 questions, so we can answer.
Yeah,
Can I ask again?
All right, yes, please ask one question.
How can the Caribbean governments fund infrastructure, education, and industrialization, starting from limited capital bases, and please source a Caribbean country in the Caribbean that have reached the global status like Singapore and South Korea?
Still two questions, but Queen's College, feel free to answer one of those two.
Okay. Yes, to answer your question, you're saying that we're working on a limited economic basis, and you're asking us to get reparations. Even if that money comes into the country, as I stated before, we need institutional reforms, and we need to look at the corruption within our very own nations. Because think about this analogy. If you pour water into a bucket with a hole, it will not fill up. That system will not change. We need to work on the institutional issues to create change. Money alone will not do it.
All right, thank you very much. That was the first period of cross-examination between the two schools at this point in time. We invite the second speaker from Merl Grove High School, Sanjay Donaldson. Wonderful. Ready when you are.
I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. All protocols observed. It is undeniable that after the transatlantic slave trade, many Caribbean countries were left devastated, not only emotionally, but also economically. This house therefore firmly believes that without reparations, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment with high-income countries because the region was never given the capital, autonomy, or stability required to do so. As Walter Rodney explains, neocolonialism is a continuation of colonial exploitation after independence, where underdevelopment persists through unequal trade and capitalist systems. In other words, political freedom was granted without economic repair. Former colonial powers such as Britain and France, along with successor powers like the United States, accumulated wealth through Caribbean extraction while leaving the region without the resources needed for independent development. One of the strongest justifications for reparations is that emancipation was never accompanied by meaningful transfers of wealth. Under mercantile law, Caribbean colonies were prohibited from manufacturing raw materials. European powers extracted natural resources and labor, processed them overseas, and kept the profits. Very little of this wealth was reinvested in the Caribbean. Instead, it funded European roads, cities, housing, and healthcare systems built on the labor of enslaved Caribbean peoples. Today, many high-income countries still benefit from this exploitation. In the United Kingdom, sites such as Breakers Quay, Walton Bridge, and the Conway Suspension Bridge were funded by slave owners. In France, port cities expanded rapidly due to the transatlantic slave trade, with slave-derived wealth used to build homes and institutions. Meanwhile, Haiti was forced to pay an independence tax, an independence debt to France. According to the New York Times, this debt is worth roughly 560 million US dollars today. Economists estimate that if this capital had remained in Haiti, it would have added over $20 billion to its economy today. This demonstrates the long-term economic gap between former colonial powers and Caribbean states. Because of this historical underinvestment, Caribbean nations today spend millions, often billions of dollars just to build basic infrastructure. According to The Guardian, many Caribbean countries became heavily indebted during the 20th century as they borrowed to fix colonial era deficiencies in healthcare, education, and transportation, while also building tourism infrastructure. This leads me to the issue of privatization. Tourism generates foreign exchange and employment, but most profits leave the regions because hotels, cruise lines, airlines, and booking platforms are foreign owned. For every dollar spent in the Caribbean, around 80 cents of it ends up overseas. Governments are pressured to offer tax breaks and land concessions to remain competitive. As a result, tourism creates activity without long term wealth, and many jobs remain low paid and insecure. The lack of capital and infrastructure also made the Caribbean largely miss out on the Industrial Revolution, the process that made many European countries wealthy and powerful, while Britain, France, and others industrialized. Caribbean colonies remain extractive economies. To further continue, to further continue, another point that would be mentioned is that it is misleading to argue that Caribbean that other former colonies were also able to break away from their former colonizers and attain high wealth, such as the United States. However, the United States and Canada, as mentioned, were settler colonies that retained land and capital. The Caribbean was an extractive plantation economy where wealth was removed rather than reinvested. Finally, climate reparations must be addressed. Despite contributing 0.3% of historic global emissions, the Caribbean is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world, despite most of the global emissions being due to military industries caused by Europe and the UK, Europe and the US. Jamaica's 500 million disaster reserve was insignificant compared to US $8 billion in damage caused by Hurricane Melissa. Therefore, adjudicators and fellow debaters, colonial extraction, neo-colonial dependence, and climate vulnerability have left the Caribbean structurally disadvantaged. Reparations through debt collection, climate compensation, and targeted investment are not charity. They are economic repair. Without reparations, dependency persists. Without reparations, neocolonialism survives. For these reasons, the House temporarily rests.
Thank you very much. That was the second speaker from Team Merl Grove High School. Now, to do similarly and extend the case for Queen's College, we invite
I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Honorable judges, esteemed proposition, fellow opposition, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good day to all. Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, once said, "Good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development." I'd like to firmly reinstate the opposition's stance on the motion that economic advancement in the Caribbean is not dependent on monetary reparations, but instead hinges on the governance of its internal affairs. Yet, if this statement was true, if the Caribbean doesn't need reparations to advance economically, what was stopping us? Now, I invite this assembly to take a stroll into the past with me. Picture the 1500s when the encomienda system was most prominent in the Spanish Caribbean. Colonies were not allowed to trade with other countries and officials were forbidden to partake in business. Yet, rules were broken, alliances formed, and Spanish officials returned to Spain far richer than when they left.
Point of information.
Denied, illegal activities and political alliances form the backbone of Caribbean society. And though the procedures themselves have evolved over time, the common denominator is the same: corruption. According to the Transparency International's Global Corruption Barometer, approximately 57% of citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean believe their government is doing a poor job in tackling corruption. And in an international economic study, found that government quality has
Point of information.
denied that government quality has a significant and direct impact on economic growth. The receipt of sums of money through reparations does not undo the historical harm done to our governance institutions. And a perfect example of this would be Haiti, post January 12, 2010. A massive magnitude 7 earthquake devastated Haiti, leading to about 200,000 deaths and 1.5 million victims homeless. In response, international donors gave Haiti approximately 13.5 billion with a B USD to rebuild over a period of 10 years. Yet, 5 years later, only 6 newly built homes were accounted for? Additionally, the many hospitals constructed during this period were rendered useless during the COVID-19 pandemic because they could not afford to staff the facilities. The money was passed into the hands of the private sector and the accountability was practically non-existent. What is the use of a rich hospital if you walk out with a plaster for your heartache? Now let's look at Suriname. Gold is Suriname's main export, yet there is barely any transparency in the procurement process. Illegal mining accounts for 2/3 of gold extractions in Suriname, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. That is money lost and economic development stunted. And these controversies are not only specific to these countries, but also across the Caribbean in Trinidad, Guyana, Cuba, Dominican Republic, etc. These problems don't occur necessarily because more money was needed at the time, but because the systems governing our economies lack transparency and integrity. Contrastingly, Singapore transformed from having 2/3 of its population living in slums to being one of the richest countries in the world, not because they waited for reparations, but because they strictly rooted out corruption from the inside out. They had poor sanitation, limited water supply, and even lacked natural resources, which is something the Caribbean does have, yet they thrived by remaining as safe and corruption-free as possible in order to attract investors, because money only works when governance works. The Nordic countries, including Switzerland and New Zealand, are all perceived as the
Point of
least
information.
in the world. Denied, are all perceived as the least corrupt nations in the world, and they rank consistently high in terms of international financial transparency. See the correlation? Now, circling back to the question posed at the beginning of my argument, what was stopping us from economically advancing without reparations? The answer is poor governance. After decades of sovereignty, we've had generations to erect industrial hubs, but we chose to keep our dependency mindset. The challenge is in maintaining the political will to tackle complex relationships entwined between the government and the private sector. However, these issues can be readily fixed by emphasizing transparency and accountability in our policies. In conjunction with each other, the Caribbean region has no limits to what its economy can achieve, with or without reparations. Now, as sociologist E. Digby Baltzell once said, the downfall of every civilization comes not with the moral complacency of the common man, but the moral complacency of the common man in high places. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Let's dive into the second period of cross-examination. This time, however, we'll invite the team in proposition to pose your questions first. And so the floor is yours, Team Merl Grove High School.
Okay, so first question for opposition. Can you explain how Caribbean governments were expected to govern effectively when their economies were designed for extraction and not development?
Could you repeat the question?
Can you explain how Caribbean governments were expected to govern effectively when their economies were designed for extraction and not development?
Well, that's just the thing. There was no expectation from our colonial powers. But are we really going to be dependent on them for our development nonetheless? Isn't that just increasing the dependency that your argument seems to be trying to avoid? Next question.
Find it. Next question. Could you provide an example in the Caribbean where Caribbean countries would have relieved themselves economically, attain economic independence?
Could you repeat the question?
Could you provide a Caribbean example where a Caribbean country has attained economic independence in this day and age?
Now, if you would look at the statistics, according to Transparency International, Barbados is the highest and least corrupt nation in the Caribbean, and it is well on its way to achieving economic independence because of their good governance and good policies.
Another question is, wouldn't you say that corruption also exists in European economies, despite them being high income countries?
Well, of course, we should all know that corruption occurs in all countries. However, the corruption in comparison to those countries in us is by far much more. And there's much more emphasis on policy. And as I say again, institutional reforms to ensure that despite whatever is going on, the people and the economy develops.
All right, thank you very much. Those were the questions from Merl Grove High School. To do so, we invite Queen's College to pose their questions.
Okay. In tourism-reliant countries such as the Bahamas and Barbados, the proposition raised the issue of foreign ownership. How will reparations change that modern ownership?
Debt cancellation.
Debt cancel. Could you repeat that question, please?
Sure. In tourism-reliant countries such as the Bahamas and Barbados, the proposition raised the issue of foreign ownership. How will reparations change that modern ownership?
Reparations will change that modern ownership in the form of debt cancellations.
And leaving sanctions.
And the sanctions as well. As mentioned, a lot of Caribbean countries in the 20th centuries would have had to take on loans to pay off debts.
Okay, next question. Even if Haiti had kept that $20 billion historically, what evidence do you have that that money could have been effectively invested rather than lost through corruption or political instability?
Well, first of all, Haiti at the time was one of actually the richest countries in the Caribbean, but due to the fact that they had to pay 150 million francs at the time, which then, if it had retained in the Caribbean, would have been $20 billion today.
Okay, last question. Most Caribbean states have been politically independent for over 50 years. So what evidence do you have that your debt cancellation reparations will benefit us in the long run?
It will benefit us as the money that would be pumped into repaying back our colonizers, they can be pumped into the country. For example, in educational sectors.
All right. That ends therefore the second period of cross-examination. At this point in time, the debate is going to pause for 1 minute so that the reply speakers can consume all the information that has been flying around and provide to us, the judges, the final case as to why their team has won this debate. That 1 minute starts now. All right. Team, this is your final shot. We now invite the opposition reply speaker, David Sugrim, to close the debate for Team Queen's College.
Good afternoon. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable judges, distinguished members of the proposition and opposition, ladies and gentlemen, this debate does not turn on whether reparations are morally justified. On that, the opposition has been clear and consistent. Justice matters. Reparation matters. What the House must decide today is something far more narrow and far more demanding. Is the Caribbean economic alignment with high-income countries impossible without reparations? After the two of my colleagues' speeches, the answer is unequivocally no. First of all, the motion claims necessity, not that reparations would help, not that they are fair, but without them, economic convergence cannot happen. This is an extraordinarily high bar. The proposition needed to prove that capital is the binding constraint of Caribbean growth, and that reparations uniquely solve that constraint, while internal reform, governance, and productivity cannot substitute for it. Our first speaker dismantled the core economic assumption behind this motion. The Caribbean does not suffer from money shortage. It suffers from a shortage of output per worker. Using the data from the Caribbean Development Bank and the IMF, Speaker 1 showed that the productivity growth in the region is near zero, not because of history alone, but because of the current policy failures and internal governance. The proposition mentioned a lot about the extractive economy. And this is the colonial legacy of monoculture extraction, a mindset, institutional wiring that demands urgent value-added expansion through bold reform. We accept that. And after decades of sovereignty, we've had generations to erect industrial hubs. We chose dependency instead as a region. Jamaican's own PM, Dr. Andrews, cut it straight, and I quote, "We must prioritize sectors that will drive future growth. There are numerous opportunities that have been discussed for years, but not yet to be fully realized on a significant scale." End quote. Thirdly, the proposition mentioned Haiti. Haiti received 13.5 billion, as my colleague mentioned, in post-disaster funds. What followed was not convergence, but collapse. Hospitals without staff, only 6 accounted for hospitals, homes that were money that moved, but the system didn't. Once again, money without reform is motion without progress. Moreover, dignity matters, but it does not replace policy. National confidence does not come from compensation. It comes from functioning states, rising economy, and opportunity creation. Vietnam identity was not built on apology. It was built on performance. Economic empowerment is one of the strongest forms of healing, and it begins with reform, not waiting. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to echo the fact that in our region, the Caribbean region, economic dependence strengthened through institutional reform, proves that reparations are not a prerequisite for high-income status. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That concludes the case for Team Queen's College. Now, to conclude this debate overall, we invite Mergrove High School's final debater, Rashanti Rodway.
Good morning. I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Before I begin my speech, I would like to address the absurd points brought up by the opposition team. The opposition can claim that current economic conditions are due to poor fiscal management, corruption, and poor internal governance, and not necessarily reparations. This is not necessarily true, opposition. While current economic conditions can be linked to poor fiscal management and corruption, it is also true that the Caribbean economies will never advance to the level of high-income countries like the United States and European colonies because they have been historically scarred. To demand reparation is merely a means to ignore one's responsibility in building your own country and instead depend on compensation from reparation, a point brought up by the proposition team. Demanding reparation does not negate responsibility for nation building. The two are not mutually exclusive. Reparations are about acknowledging and addressing historical injustices whose economic, social, and institutional consequences persist across generations. Opposition, are you suggesting that we should just let them off the hook for committed crimes against our people for hundreds of years? Many nations, including Jamaica and Guyana, to this day are still affected by structural disadvantages created by slavery and colonialism, which limited our ability to accumulate wealth and compete on an equal footing. The opposition also stated that the corruption and domestic mismanagement is the real reason Caribbean economies struggle. Corruption exists everywhere, including high-income countries. The difference is that they have capital buffers and institutional investments built from colonial wealth. Caribbean states are managing scarcity created by extraction, reparations to address the structural deficit that makes governance failures more damaging. Also, the opposition stated that wouldn't reparations create dependency rather than development? Dependency already exists through IMF loans, debt services, and capital flights. Reparations reduce dependency by restoring fiscal space and allowing domestic investments without external conditionality. Opposition. I want you to imagine this. Imagine running a race where everyone else starts at the finish line and you start 300 years behind. Before the whistle even blows, your legs are shackled, your land is stripped, and the profits of your labor are handed to someone else. Now imagine that race being called the global economy. Opposition. It is ludicrous to think that the Caribbean can compete in the highly competitive global economy when we have been treated as an export country for centuries. Centuries, opposition. I want you to understand the stark contrast between a European economy and a Caribbean economy. It is naive to think that it is due to poor fiscal management and corruption alone. It is because they committed crimes against our economy for years. That is the reality of the Caribbean today. Good morning, adjudicators, my opponents, and my fellow teammates. My name is Ashanti Rodway, and we join here today to talk about the topic at hand. This House believes that without reparations, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment with high-income countries. Now, building on my teammates' substantives, the Caribbean was deliberately designed to be only an export economy. We produce sugar, coffee, and raw goods, our sweat, our labor, our lives, fueling European wealth, while we received nothing in return. The profits, the labor, our lives, the development, and the industrial growth all went elsewhere. Opposition. Even after slavery ended, the Caribbean was not compensated. It was charged. Can you imagine fighting for freedom only to be stuck under new rules that still limit your control over your own economy? Puerto Rico is another example of neocolonialism, which I will talk about. The opposition continue to make reference of foreign countries, for example, Singapore and South Korea. Opposition. Countries like South Korea received massive post-war investments, which was used to fund their country after the war. And Singapore was a British trading and military hub, not a plantation colony. Britain poured into infrastructure opposition. I would like you to source a Caribbean country that advanced economically today in alignment with high-income countries like European colonies. One of the clearest illustrations is the Jones Act of 1920, which requires that all goods shipped between U.S. ports, including Puerto Rico's ports, be transported to U.S.-built, U.S.-owned, and U.S.-crewed vessels. Why would anyone hinder anyone's ability to trade economically? Done?
Indeed, it is finished. The debate has concluded, ladies and gentlemen. Who will be advancing via automatic win to round 2 of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026? Well, the judges are going to excuse themselves to another space to find that out and return to you shortly with the results and feedback.
Okay, I think this about wraps this interview up. When can you start?
Whenever you'd like. I just have a few questions. Where will I be stationed?
You'll be stationed in Jamaica. So you start your journey from Europe to Africa and then finally Jamaica.
Ooh, Jamaica? Where in Jamaica?
La Nueva. You'll be staying there with free housing and free lunch and dinner and breakfast.
Free housing and lunch? I'm about ready to sign my contract. I just have a question. What will be my responsibilities at the CV a la Nueva?
Oh, nothing. As a harvester for the Royal African Agency, you will be responsible for cutting, threshing, gathering, winnowing, collecting, unloading, and residue management.
And this comes with extra on top of my base pay of 97,000 USD, right?
No,
No to the bonuses?
no, you'll all be getting 500 USD.
Why? Excuse me, what?
Oh no, but that's a pay for the Indians. You won't be getting paid.
Sorry, Indians what?
You get free housing though, and enough food to allow you to live. And
Yep, this is me. You're probably confused how I ended up back in the encomienda system. Free housing, free food, but no pay. How's this different? Colonizers used to say, we'll feed you and shelter you, only in exchange for your freedom, your voice, your rights, your sanity. I mean, should I really go on? But anyways, let's go back to the video.
a amount of vitamin D.
I think I'm gonna leave.
Where are you going? Didn't you want the job?
I did, but I don't think I'm the best fit for this position.
Isn't she African?
I'm from Germany! Tied at their hands, tied at their feet, our ancestors traveled bounded across treacherous seas, packed like a tin of sardines.
Slavery was crazy back then, and its effects are still evident now. That's why we believe that we need reparations. My name is Astarte Montague.
And my name is Ashanti Rodriguez.
And my name is Sanjay Donaldson. We are the Merl High School debate team, and this is our video on why we need reparations today. We, as descendants of those who were colonized and enslaved, still live with the damages today. And our colonizers still benefit from the wealth that was stolen from our ancestors.
European colonizers stole the land, labor, and resources from the indigenous people and the Africans, gaining wealth from slavery and exploitation while leaving our nations poor and underdeveloped. This isn't just history. The effects are still here. Poverty, inequality, and economic dependency all trace back to that period.
Reparations are necessary, not as charity, but as justice. They are both acknowledging the crimes of colonialism and the crimes of slavery. This is about repairing the harm done and creating fair opportunities for those who were affected.
As Queens College students, we firmly believe that reparations are a way to honor our ancestors' suffering.
Caribbean societies that have emerged from the roots of colonialism and slavery continue to experience generational poverty, even as the region moves towards development.
But why do we even need reparations today? You see, the fact of the matter is, the injustices of imperialism still mold and shape society today.
We believe that the movement for reparations is essential towards the full dismantlement of the colonial mindset that many of us still hold in current times.
So, let us not be chained by the weight of our past any longer. Instead, let us start to make strides towards the changes that the Caribbean actually needs.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice, and the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the transatlantic slavery. This is going to be a phenomenal competition.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
for justice for the 5 million enslaved Africans trafficked to the Caribbean. Think about it. Chattel slavery didn't just end, it left deep, painful scars across each Caribbean country. The deliberate underdevelopment, the brutal trauma and violence we inherited. It's time to repair this damage so we can build thriving, sustainable economies where young people like us can dream big, achieve more, and live better lives right here in our own home. Do you see why repair matters? Stand with us, join the calls for justice, and sign the petition for reparations at repaircampaign.org/petition.
It's very important that this is understood, because we can't talk about legacies before talking about what left those legacies on our landscape. Enslaved Africans were subjected to the worst atrocities imaginable: kidnapping, storage in filthy barracoons, the Middle Passage, forced drowning as in the case of the slaver Zong, branding with hot iron, including by the church, with SPG being seared into the flesh of those they owned. Unrelenting field and factory labor, legal codes that rendered them non-human, and harsh punishments when they resisted enslavement. Deportation, dismemberment, hanging, imprisonment, severe flogging, including of women and children. According to Lucille Matherin Mayer, and I quote, "Neither age nor pregnancy exempted women from corporal punishment. Rather, they were laid down in the filthiest place the driver could find for floggings. Child labor was rampant, and women and girls faced sexual violence." Orlando Patterson wrote in his Sociology of Slavery the following: "The sexual exploitation of female slaves by white men was the most disgraceful aspect of Jamaican slave society." Unfortunately, the church was complicit in this crime against humanity. Initially, Christian planters did not think that the African was of theological significance. According to Elsa Gavaya, and I quote, "Early English slave law almost totally neglected the enslaved as a subject for religious instruction, as a member of a family, or as a member of society possessing some rights, as the same rights as everyone else."
Did you grow up on Anansi stories? Yep, most of us have. But did you know that Anansi played a major role in our ancestors' survival? So let's talk about it. He's more than just a trickster spider. He was a means of inspiration for resistance.
Anansi's cleverness in outsmarting his rivals mirrored tactics enslaved people used in their daily lives. By pretending to be foolish or inept, a technique known as play fool for catch wise, enslaved people lowered their enslavers' expectations and reduced suspicion. These methods, inspired by Anansi, are known as Anansi tactics, or in Twi from Ghana, Anansi Sem. Anansi outwitted powerful animals and even white enslavers using cunning and wit. During the plantation era, Anansi tales were shared in enslaved quarters and sometimes in front of European enslavers. These stories, recorded in journals, reveal how enslaved people used public performances to mask hidden defiance. Plantation whites often missed the rebellious messages in these tales. Caribbean Anansi stories depict him evading punishment, tricking enslavers, and a whole plethora of adventures which highlight the resistance and survival through Anansi tactics.
400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what would be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you will be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight, we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, Master said there's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get our strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave, rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
And here's what does need reparative justice. It is the seasoning period when we landed on the soil and they took away our names and our gods and our culture, and no slave system that we understand thus far has ever had that deculturalization process embedded in the process of our enslavement. So our enslavement was not just physical, it was not just culture, it was spiritual, because you took me away from everything. Who then must I look up to? Who then must I emulate? Who then must I kill myself in order to elevate you?
What is common about the wealth? A flag raises high, but the strings still pull from London. We sing our anthems in borrowed tongues, march to the beat of siphons' drums, celebrating a freedom that still pays tribute. Independent? What is that when the governor's shadow still lingers? They tell us, we free. Tell that to the bones at Rappery. The 196 who fought and won only to drown in chains. Our Negmawan. Do the people of North Devon not hear the howls raging for their home? The tide spits their cries, their names foam in fury, salted by a sea that will not forget. They call us independent, yet a crown still sits above 14 nations, still bent at the knee, still ruled by a throne built from our gold. They took our labor, snatched our names, they welcomed our craft, then cast us adrift. Windrush mothers, fathers, exiled from the empire they built. What is common about the wealth? Our persistent potency that perseveres through acute artistry. We carve language into legacy, turn sorrow into song, drum resistance as rhythm, sink steel into symphony. We are the architects of new worlds, the poets, the painters, the prophets, who make home in remnants still, who forge futures from fractured pasts. They took the wealth, but we are the riches.
And remember that chattel slavery of the African people was also genocide. This is not highlighted sufficiently. If you take my home island of Barbados in the Caribbean, the British brought 600,000 people into Barbados. 600,000 Africans were brought into Barbados. The black population of Barbados today is 280,000. How do you reduce 600,000 to 290,000 after 200 years? They brought 3 million into Jamaica. At the end of the slavery malarkey, there were just about 600,000. The survival rate of African people in the Caribbean was about 17%. It was horrendous.
The Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community.
But I will say to you, therefore, that the issue of reparations for the transatlantic slavery is an issue that we will take up with you, and that the appropriate apology and compensation is paid, and that the international community accepts that this should never happen again.
And yes, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, slavery is a crime against humanity.
The concept of reparations would take the question of development repair, and it would be multi-generational. What needs to happen is face-to-face discussions, which we deem as absolutely important, because if you can't see me or hear me, it is not appropriate to be able to make a judgment as to who or what I am and what I should receive.
Progress also means reparatory justice to heal historical wounds and climate justice to secure our future. We must be bold, demand what is owed, and build a Caribbean that thrives.
Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, okay, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice, and the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the
Ladies and gentlemen, the judges are back, and we have the results of this match 2 of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. Which of these two teams will be joining Arima in the next round of competition? Will it be Merl High School or will it be Queen's College? So the debate in front of us, this House believes that without reparation, the Caribbean cannot advance economically in alignment rather with high income countries. We had one central clash that expanded throughout the debate, but still existed within that one central clash. And that was a matter of the historical nature of the Caribbean region being one of exploitation and and just removing all of our methods of resources and extraction. And that is why we are the way we are and we can't get better. Or the idea that the reason why we are and the reason why we can't get better is not because of that, but rather because of corruption and policy failures and mismanagement. Now, how did the debate flesh out? Astarte Montague started out the debate by going into great detail a historical lesson of why it is that we are here right now. She talked about the fact that that our profits were stripped away from us, that there was absolutely no capital accumulation within the country, in as much as we existed to funnel wealth into the economies of the colonizers, and therefore the infrastructure that existed within our Caribbean nation was only the bare minimum to facilitate that kind of extraction. They talked about the global wealth disparity and the fact that we were left with a really weak export market, so weak that we had to end up borrowing back from those same colonizers. And she painted a particular interesting argument, but with this analogy. It's, for example, saying that one country started centuries ahead with stolen wealth, and we are far behind. She went a little bit further. She went a little bit further, yes, and explained and preempted a particular idea. But there are other countries that existed that were also colonized, but that those countries did well. She pointed out the example of the United States of America and pointed out that there's a distinct difference between those kind of countries and the countries that exist in the Caribbean, and that is that those countries were settler countries and those in the Caribbean were not. So, in as much as even if they were colonized, there was some sort of capital accumulation within those countries, and that allowed them to have certain levels of infrastructure and benefit and wealth that Jamaica and other Caribbean countries, Guyana, just simply did not have. What did we hear then from the team in opposition? Well, Africa told us, well, the problem is not necessarily that kind of extraction. She concedes, rightly so, that reparation is justice, but the motion is questioning whether or not reparation is justice, and that their stance on Queen's College is not about whether or not we deserve reparations, but solely and only what the motion is demanding from them to debate, very smartly and very rightly, which is whether or not reparation will lead to us becoming in economic alignment. She says no. She says no because what is actually happening is that we have policy failures, mismanagement, and a host of corruption. He says even if by virtue of receiving the reparation, we get a bunch of money coming into our these countries, the problem is simply going to be mismanagement. It is not going to help because the systems that exist and the systems that are in place in status quo by these Caribbean countries is not one of transparency. It's one plagued by corruption. It's one plagued by mismanagement. We love that analysis. She brought up some ideas, for example, South Korea and Singapore, that also went through the aspects of colonization, but they did well. The judges wanted to know, given the preemption of this analysis from Astarte, what about Singapore and Korea makes them just like the Caribbean? See, Astarte already gave us a baseline that some countries are settler countries. Was Singapore a settler country? Was South Korea a settler country? Well, team proposition clearly seems to think so. In as much as the judges are reasonably well-read citizens who, as I explained during training, are individuals who as I explained in the training, are just individuals who generally understand and read the Gleaner, read the different news articles that exist, read the newspaper. Anything beyond that kind of knowledge is not one that the judges are going to have. At the end of the debate, the judges aren't sure whether or not Singapore, South Korea, and these other countries that Queens justified as saying they were colonial countries that did well through proper management, proper and lack of corruption, were these settler states or not? We don't know. Merl certainly claims that they are. Queen's College doesn't give us any justification for why they are not, and so we're not sure about the credibility of those examples in aligning and pushing forward the case from Team Queens. Right? We also heard very interesting ideas well coming out from Sanjay, I believe is the proper pronunciation of your name. We heard interesting ideas. We thought the first part of your speech was kind of derivative from Africa's speech, but we got a really interesting ideas. We missed out on the Industrial Revolution by virtue of being colonized by these countries. Wow, that's a big claim. It's a big man argument. We love that. We wanted to hear a lot more about that. What about the fact that while the Industrial Revolution was going on, we were just recovering from the effects of enslavement, that made us not able to participate in the Industrial Revolution? That's an interesting idea, the judges think. What about climate reparation makes it so that we are intrinsically less likely to be doing well than the other colonized? We hear that they produce all of the climate emissions and we suffer, right, as the Caribbean. Why? Why are we suffering disproportionately to them? And why is that a factor in regards to the fact that reparation won't help? We thought that these two ideas came far too late in your speech and were not nearly sufficiently developed enough. And we wanted to hear a lot more about that, right? Now, during the cross examinations, we had a little bit of back and forth. We think that the judges, when weighing this, we really had to weigh this debate, and in fact, the scores were really close. The judges had some conclusions. We think one team did better in the cross examination as an objective fact. We also think that one team was stylistically better than another team, but we saw one team had better content than another team. And so the scores end up being really, really close. The team that wins this debate ends on 272 points. The team not automatically advancing to round 2 of this competition, ending on 270 points. And so, at the end of deliberation, the judges would have concluded that the team that did just enough to advance to the next round of this competition is the team in proposition Merl High School.
Oh, we? Oh.
Yes, Merl High School. We want to say, well played, Queen's College. The judges concluded that you were the stylistically better team, but that the content from Merl High School, the judges found to be superior. We really appreciated their analysis and breakdown of the history of extraction that causes us to fall behind. We wanted to hear a lot more about what about the Caribbean is so uniform that corruption and policy mismanagement across all of the Caribbean and CARICOM countries is such a consistent and prevalent issue that it has caused that it will not actually be a good thing should we get this reparation in pursuit of economic alignment. We wanted to see that point of convergence amongst all of the Caribbean countries. The judges thought that Merl contention, that the point of convergence and the common factor between us all is the fact that we were used as extractor colonies. And so we would have given Merl Grove High the win. So congratulations, team Merl Grove High School, and very well played. Very, very well played, Teams Queens College. The best debater from this match comes to us from the winning team, Merl Grove High School, and that is the final speaker, Rashante Radway. We loved your reply speech.
I'm sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, join us in a very few moments. We will be having the next match in this competition, where Goodwood Secondary School from Trinidad and Tobago will be playing off against C.V. Bessel Senior High School, the club from Bahamas. And on the motion, this House supports the formation of a stronger, unified political and economic bloc among post-colonial states to counter neo-colonialism. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Congratulations to Queen's College as well. It was a well-played match and I enjoyed playing with you guys.
The team of Queen's College would like to congratulate Merl Grove High School. You really put up the fight and we really appreciated debating with you.
Thank you.